I want to start with you, Jim. First of all, what are you learning about this rather daring U.S. operation to rescue the service member?
Yeah. Well, Wolf, it was daring and dangerous and highly intricate, involving dozens of warplanes, hundreds of U.S. military personnel and intelligence personnel, but also the remark later that evening indicating that he was injured. And then over the next more than 24-hour period, on multiple fronts, the U.S. military sprung into action, organizing a search and rescue operation involving both aircraft but also boots on the ground, as well as generating a misinformation campaign inside Iran to, in effect, throw Iranian authorities or attempt to throw them off the scent, saying that both U.S. pilots had by that point already been rescued. Wasn't true. The Iranian government was doing its best to try to find the pilot first, going so far as to encourage residents in the area to look for the pilot, report his location, even offering a reward. And then that pilot, in the midst of this, found his way 7,000 feet up a ridgeline, hid there as his location was pinpointed, and then those forces went in Iranian hands. But that pilot, taken to safety, time to treat those injuries, serious injuries, that, though we are told he will recover. Just a remarkable more than 24 hours with a tremendous outcome for the military, for the pilot, and certainly
U.S. forces have rescued a second service member missing since Iran downed a F-15 fighter jet on Friday. The airman's extraction followed a major search and rescue mission. Donald Trump said the weapon systems officer was injured but in stable condition.
Have you found anything yet?
God willing, he'll be found.
The U.S. mobilized its elite Navy SEALs, which, according to U.S. media, opened fire on Iranian convoys as they swept in and recovered the missing crew member. He had reportedly been hiding in mountainous terrain, armed with a pistol and tracking beacon. U.S. sources said there was a technical malfunction during the extraction, forcing the commandos to blow up two of their own transport planes. But Iran claimed the collateral damage as its own victory, releasing these images of burning wreckage in the central Isfahan region.
Following examinations by experts at the scene, it was determined that two C-130 military aircraft and two Black Hawk helicopters of the U.S. Army were destroyed through the fulfillment of promise and help of Almighty God.
Both Washington and Tehran are using the incident to declare their superiority over the skies. The full details of the mission will likely become the stuff of military legend for years to come.
for his family and loved ones.
So, Colonel, you know so much about the military. One, I guess it's news here that this is seriously wounded. It seemed different than the message from the president last night. So hopefully he will recover here. Secondly, what does this tell you about how complex this mission was and what goes into the planning and the tactics in pulling something like this off?
Yeah, Manu, so happy Easter. There are a lot of different aspects to this that are, I think, critical to understand, because when you have a mission of this type, you have to bring a lot of different elements together. So you have different aircraft that are being used in order to extract and extricate somebody who is in a position like this. The added complication now appears to be the fact that the colonel was wounded, and apparently seriously wounded, according to the president. And that is, of course, significant, because that means probably that he had limited mobility, and that would also necessitate extra personnel coming in to not only stabilize him potentially, but also to bring him out. And that would have been a key element here, because with that extra personnel, there's extra danger. And as President Trump mentioned in the statement that you just read, the Iranians were getting close. So that meant that they may have been thrown off the scent at first by the CIA disinformation and other things that were going on, other deception campaigns that were probably being mounted in this case. But the aspect of, they were not, they were clearly paying attention to what was going on in their airspace, and to some extent they were able to follow what was actually happening, and they may have picked up the scent, basically, that this operation was happening at a specific location. But all of the different pieces and parts that come together really mean that every level of command, from the squadron that actually affects the rescue, all the way to the commander-in-chief, were heavily involved in this operation. And that meant that there was intricate planning. They had to have all the right resources in place, and they also had to be prepared to abort the mission should personnel be in greater danger, but they didn't have to do that in this situation.
I want you to weigh in on this video from overnight, because the Iranian state media shared these images of this apparent aircraft wreckage after the U.S. rescue operation. You can see it.
Well, let's talk about this military legend. Jonathan Hackett is a retired U.S. Marine Corps Special Operations Capabilities Specialist. He's joining us from New Haven, Connecticut. Good to have you with us. So, details about the rescue mission, which is also known as combat search and rescue, are gradually emerging. There are contradictions, however. There was talk of a firefight during the rescue. This has been debunked. Also, the true number of troops involved was disputed, from hundreds to fewer than 100. Why all this confusion?
I think there are a few different sources of the confusion. First, to understand the combat search and rescue mission, one must understand that there are forces outside of Iran that are also participating in this, which can give that larger number of over 100. But inside of the country, actually, be much fewer people. There were a couple of Little Bird helicopters involved and some transport aircraft. And the problem was the transport aircraft actually got stuck in the dirt there, where they made a tactical landing zone, which required the infiltration of more forces than were initially expected to start the rescue. But that's part of the reason why that aircraft had to be destroyed on site before the forces were able to leave.
Okay, so this is something that we know now. We also know that the crew member spent some 24 hours alone, hiding in the mountains with a handgun and a tracking beacon. I assume that this is how the US rescue team detected him. And if so, wasn't that dangerous, because that would leave him exposed to detection by the Iranian military as well?
Every pilot in the United States goes through a very difficult training program to survive, evade, resist, and escape in a situation just like this. And there are multiple ways to communicate besides the radio beacon. And the pilot or weapons officer would use this beacon at very specific moments where it was safest to use it, and then it would not use it until the next time it was required to be used. So the person would go and find safety, use the beacon, and move to a new location of safety, all according to their training. And this is how the United States was able to safely find them and then rescue them without Iranian forces coming onto the scene.
And we know that, because you just mentioned without Iranian forces or even Iranian contact there, because, I mean, 24 hours can be a very long time. You just mentioned that members of the US military are, of course, trained very well. But how are they expected to handle such a situation? Also mentally, what are they being trained for there?
There are a number of factors besides the hostile forces to consider, as you noted. So in this area, it's around 37 degrees Celsius during the day. It's quite hot. The person went down without much food or water at all. So they need to actually think about, how do I feed myself? How do I get water? Where is safety to sleep during the night? Without considering the hostile forces at all. They also need to think about the terrain, because looking at this area, there are a number of steep ridge lines and valleys, and very hard to navigate through this area, which is about 30 kilometers south of Isfahan, which is a major city. But this area they were in is actually very little population, and it's a small ethnic group called the Lori people that actually live in this area, that are very separate from the central government of Iran. So there may have been some actual local people there to either provide assistance or allow safe passage through the area, to kind of demonstrate their support for the U.S. forces in the area, actually.
And would you agree with Donald Trump's post, where he declared that this was one of the most daring search and rescue operation in U.S. military history?
This is, in fact, one of the most complicated special operations rescues that we've ever heard of since 1980, when the United States first tried to rescue Americans in Iran during the Operation Eagle Claw, which was actually a failed rescue attempt and spurred the creation of Special Operations Command, the very unit that affected this rescue yesterday.
And what do we know about the rescued crew member? Do we know his identity, and what exactly is his physical condition? We heard that he's injured. How bad is it?
So this person's identity will be withheld for two reasons. First, to identify the family and notify the family this person's been rescued and to let them know that they're okay. And second, this person will be debriefed by trained professionals to better understand, while it's still fresh in their mind, what their evasion situation was like, to help inform future training. And we don't want the public to be aware of that person's condition during this period of time because they're in a very fragile mental state. And they're certainly injured after the landing in the desert area, besides the hostile forces tracking them. So that person's going to get medical attention and care and debriefing before the public knows who they are.
All right, Jonathan Hackett, retired U.S. Marine Corps Special Operations Capabilities Specialist there. Jonathan, thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you.
President Trump has announced that the US has rescued the missing crew member of a military jet that was downed over Iran in what he's described as one of the most daring operations in American history. The US and Iran had been searching for the airman since Friday after his F-15 fighter plane was shot down by Tehran. Mr. Trump said the rescue involved dozens of aircraft operating deep in enemy territory. The weapons systems officer was aboard a US F-15 that was shot down in southern Iran. A pilot who was also on board was rescued earlier. Let's take a look at what Donald Trump has been posting on Truth Social. The president said, "We got him," before going on to call the rescue one of the most daring search and rescue operations in US history. The president confirmed the second pilot is now safe and sound before saying this is the first time in military memory 2 US pilots have been rescued separately deep in enemy territory. He then said, "We will never leave an American warfighter behind." Our World Affairs correspondent Joe Inwood has the story.
Americans seem to have won. Across the rocky hills of southwestern Iran, local people searched for the missing weapons systems officer. A large reward had been promised. "Don't worry, he'll be found," the man says. The F-15E pilot had already been rescued. Now, in what President Trump called one of the most daring search and rescue operations in US history, the weapons system officer has also been found. In an online post, he wrote the airman was never truly alone, as they were monitoring his location 24 hours a day. "We will never leave an American warfighter behind," he added.
We lost the 2 aircraft, and in this particular case, fate was on our side, and we've been able to recover all 3 of those pilots. So I think it's going to be a morale boost, but then again, those military operations are going to be ongoing. So we may find disappointment right around the corner.
It comes amidst intensifying attacks at the heart of Iran's oil industry. Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened to destroy this country's power plants, its economy, even its desalination plants if a deal is not reached. Although these strikes appear to have been claimed by the US's main ally in this war, Israel.
After we destroyed 70% of their steel production capacity, which serves as raw material for their weapons, today we struck the petrochemical plants.
It's not just industrial sites now being targeted. New footage has emerged of the moment US airstrikes destroyed the recently constructed B-1 bridge near Tehran. Donald Trump threatened to bomb Iran, in his words, back to the Stone Ages. Even as they looked on the ruins of their own houses, Iranians living nearby did not take kindly to that suggestion.
When we were in the Stone Age, we were still more advanced than the Americans. When you love your homeland, you'd even love the rubble left from your homes.
Earlier, Donald Trump renewed his threats against Iran, taking to social media to say, "Remember when I gave Iran 10 days to make a deal or open up the Hormuz Strait? Time is running out. 48 hours before all hell will rain down on them." The Strait of Hormuz is a vital waterway, which has been effectively shut by Iran. The Revolutionary Guards released this footage showing what they say was their 95th missile barrage of the war. This has turned into an asymmetric conflict. US military muscle being met with Iranian economic pressure. It is still far from clear which will prove decisive. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
We begin with some good news this Easter Sunday morning as that rescued officer is being flown to Kuwait to be treated for his injuries when his fighter jet got shot down Friday. President Trump posted on Truth Social in the early hours of this morning, "We got him," calling the operation an amazing show of bravery and talent by all. As he's renewed threats to Iran in recent days of intensifying military operations if they don't negotiate, he also declared this morning that Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one. Senior National Security Correspondent Charlie D'Agata has details on the mission.
U.S. officials and White House sources describe a complex operation involving dozens of U.S. commandos and several dozen warplanes and helicopters in the search and eventual rescue of the missing F-15 crew member. Attack helicopters and aircraft kept Iranian forces from getting anywhere near where the crewman was hiding. Armed Iranians had been scouring the mountainous terrain to find him first, with the promise of a huge cash reward. But a Trump administration official tells CBS News the CIA was deeply involved, not only in the hunt, but in a ploy to spread false information inside Iran that U.S. forces had already found him and were transporting him by ground out of the country. The race to find the two-man F-15 crew began on Friday. The pilot was rescued within hours of the fighter jet being brought down. He sustained some injuries. We've learned the second crewman is seriously wounded, according to President Trump. The downing of the jet came amid a fierce U.S. bombing campaign in Iran, including blowing up Iran's biggest bridge linking Tehran to key cities. Iran says more than a dozen people were killed. And Iran has continued to retaliate, striking an oil refinery in Iraq, launching strikes across the Gulf from Bahrain to Kuwait, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and more missile barrages in Israel. Yesterday, President Trump again warned that time is running out for Iran to open up the Strait of Hormuz by tomorrow, or the U.S. will unleash hell. A senior Iranian leader has rejected that ultimatum.
Charlie D'Agata in London, thank you.
Let's talk about the mission to rescue that soldier. It's incredibly impressive that the U.S. military pulled this off. It's also incredibly dangerous. I'm old enough to remember the ill-fated rescue mission Eagle Claw in 1980, where we lost some service members who were trying to rescue the American hostages in Iran. How does a mission like this happen?
Jake, this is actually, Eagle Claw is important. I was in contact with a lot of my former colleagues in the Special Forces community that I've just been so honored and privileged to work with over so many years. And this is really full circle for that community. You know, the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, was formed after that ill-fated operation. We lost 8 soldiers in 1980 in that operation in Iran to try to rescue Americans, those hostages. Here we just went into Iran, the most hostile territory you can imagine, to rescue 2 Americans. The operation was successful. Obviously, there was some material damage. It is extraordinary, and it is because of what we have done through our military forces, through our special operators, all the jointness and the training and everything else over so many years. Nobody else can do this. You know, an anecdote, when Iran's president was lost in a helicopter crash some years ago in the Biden administration, Iran actually sent a message to us asking if we could help find the helicopter. So nobody else has these capabilities. Nobody else is more determined to make sure when we send our men and women overseas, we have that search and rescue capability on call at any moment. And here they just demonstrated to the world what they can do.
So after the president gave the 2 to 3 week deadline, 2 military aircraft were shot down. CNN learned that U.S. intelligence is privately contradicting the president's claim. They say Iran's missile stockpile is not decimated. About half of it still exists. Also drones. The president also previously claimed that the Iranians have no anti-aircraft equipment. That's obviously not true. What does it say to you that Iran has successfully downed 2 U.S. aircraft in recent days? Thankfully, all of the Americans are safe and alive.
It's after thousands of sorties. I think you have to put this in perspective. We lost 44 aircraft in the 1991 Gulf War, but obviously it's concerning. If Iran still has these capabilities that they can pop out and have an effective shot like this. I know our military folks in CENTCOM are studying very much what happened. Is this a new capability? Is this something we didn't fully anticipate? What does it mean going forward.
Does
So
it
I
mean
think
the
they'll take
Chinese
that
and
out.
Russians are helping them also?
Well, I certainly hope not. You know, one thing, Jake, that could bring coherence to this military campaign is connecting a little bit to Russia, which you just mentioned. I mean, the Iranian missile and drone program is a huge, huge international problem. It's under Chapter 7 sanctions. They proliferate this stuff to terrorists around the Middle East and to Russia. Russia prosecutes its war in Ukraine with Iranian technology. And you can actually connect the two. Unfortunately, over the last week, we've actually been dividing NATO, and I think that actually helps the Russian position. But no, this is a serious problem, Jake. I hope after this amazing rescue, we bring some coherence to the operation, very clear on the objectives and how we're going to get that straight opened. Hope there's a deal, but I don't think there will be. And then we're going to have some big decisions to make.
Brett McGurk, as always, thank you for your expertise.
Joining us now, Hal Kempfer is a retired U.S. Marine intelligence officer and the CEO of a global risk intelligence and planning company. Hal, thanks very much for being with us. First off, what was your reaction when you learned the U.S. had rescued this airman?
Well, Wolf, obviously I was very pleased to see we had a successful combat search and rescue operation. And then as the details started to unfold, it really says something about what we can do. This is an operation that I think very few, if any, countries in the world could pull off. It had a lot of moving parts. There was the operational side. There was a special operations side. There was also this amazing intelligence effort and even a CIA disinformation deception plan, if you will, to mislead the Iranians during the rescue itself. And it also says a lot about SEER training, survival, evasion, resistance, escape. The colonel did an amazing job, injured, was able to get to safe ground, hunker down, and was able to contact and basically make this whole thing happen.
We're also learning, Hal, that the CIA was the first to locate him and was also running what was being described as a deception campaign inside Iran while the rescue took place. Can you take us through the CIA's role in this operation and how the CIA officials might have been the first to locate him?
Well, obviously, a lot of that is classified, as you can well imagine, so there's only so many details that we know. But the CIA has tremendous assets. They also have the ability to pull in all the assets of the rest of the intelligence community. Obviously, they received contact from the colonel. They knew where he was. There's a variety of different means, and I can only speculate that these are signals intelligence and dealing with some overhead systems we have. We're able to locate them. And then they had to look around the area that's well within Iran. It's near Isfahan. It's near a populated area. And they had to probably direct him, is my guess, to where he could be safely hid until they could get to him, and then find the site where the C-130s had to land, come up with this operation with the small birds, the special operators, and they pulled it all off. But the CIA was absolutely intricate, even putting out the deception notice that he had been rescued or was being rescued while they were mounting the rescue.
Yeah, to try to mislead the Iranians. Even though the U.S. and Israel both say they have control of Iran's skies, how dangerous was this mission for U.S. planes?
Well, we have air superiority, we have air dominance, but with that said, there is always inherent danger. There's no way to take out every man-portable air defense shoulder-fired missile out there, and there's other air defense systems they have. We've never declared air supremacy, which means we completely own the skies, and I think there's a reason for that, is there is some latent capabilities, and of course, anytime you get close to the ground, danger, inherent risk. Although we have apparently suppressed most of the air defense assets in Iran.
The president, in today's social media post, threatened to target Iranian power plants and Iranian bridges on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, if the Strait of Hormuz isn't reopened. What do you expect will happen in the coming days?
Well, I think that's a maximum pressure statement that he made. But what I would expect is that there's targets, if you will, the critical infrastructure targets within Iran, bridges, power plants, and I can think of some other things that have dual use purpose. For example, they support the military, they support the military industrial complex. At the same time, they also have civilian applications. Those will come under target. I would also be looking very closely along the coastline, and particularly those islands that are in the Strait of Hormuz and even Kark Island further up the Persian Gulf. All of these are target areas that might be considered.
Well, let's get more analysis on this operation, how it's unfolded over the past 2 days. With me is Mikey Kay, military analyst for the Security Brief. Hi, Mikey. So this plane was hit, this F-15 was hit on Friday. Take us through the plane and what we understand happened.
Yeah, just a quick refresher on the plane. I think we've got a picture of the F-15E Strike Eagle. It's a multi-role aircraft. It's got air-to-air capability, which means it can go after drones on drone cap, which is combat air patrol, or it can do air-to-ground precision strikes. But I think the important bit here is it's 2 crew operated. You've got a pilot in the front, and you've got what's called a weapons systems officer or operator in the back. If you look at the back of that aircraft, you can see red livery, which is the red stripe, and LN. We know that those aircraft have been deployed from RAF Lakenheath, which is near Cambridge in the UK, and they've been in the region. And then when you cross-transfer that with the debris, we know that aircraft that was shot down, and that crew is likely to have been from RAF Lakenheath.
So the plane is hit. The crew know they need to eject. What happens then?
Yeah, the ejection is quite a brutal process. So the crew will, or the captain of the aircraft will only decide that they will eject when the aircraft becomes unflyable. In the early days, we didn't know why the aircraft was unflyable, because that could be a technical fault, could be friendly fire, or it could be, from surface-to-air missiles. This is the ejection seat here. So what happens is that when the captain decides to eject, there'll be a command sequence, and there's these little yellow and black handles based in between your legs. Some ejection seats have them actually above the head as well. You'll pull that handle, and it'll set off a sequence. And because this is 2 crew, it's likely that the weapons systems operator in the back will eject first, and then milliseconds later, the pilot in the front will then also eject. What's important about the ejection is it's quite brutal, as I said. It's about a 25G punch from the rear. 25G basically means it's 25 times what your body weight is. So if you eject slightly with your head down, then your head becomes 25 times heavier what it is, and that can produce massive forces on the body. So you need to be in the right posture, you need to have your head back, and then you pull the handles, and then you come out. When you come out of the aircraft, the canopy will explode off, the ejection seat will come out, but then you're going into a quite significant airflow. So the aircraft will fly probably greater than 300 knots. And so you're hitting a 300 mile an hour wind, if you like. So that in itself is pretty brutal. And we haven't even spoken about sort of, what damage has been done to the aircraft. If it's a proximity fuse on one of the missiles, has that hit the cockpit? Is the pilot already injured as they're ejecting? So then as you come out, you then have a barometric gauge on the ejection seat. If it's above 10,000 feet, the seat will remain strapped to the pilots until it descends through 10,000 feet. I use 10,000, it's a nominal because of hypoxia and the requirement for oxygen. As it comes through 10,000 feet, it'll automatically separate. So now you've got 2 crew outside of this aircraft. The aircraft's obviously going to go to the impact site. And now, depending on the prevailing winds, these two parachutes are going to be blown in certain directions, likely separated, or in this case, were separated. And then you're looking at what type of terrain they're going to land on. So they're in a high threat environment. I think it's important to say that. So they'll have a 9mm pistol, which will be strapped to them at some place on their vest or on their body. And they'll be now coming down onto terrain. Now, in the terms of the weapon system operator in the back, we know that person came down relatively near high terrain. And the first thing that they need to do, so they're trained in what's called E&E, which is escape and evasion, and they're trained in what's called R2I, which is resistance to interrogation. Hopefully it doesn't get to the latter. So as soon as they land on, they'll be looking to gather up the parachute, gather up any kit that they don't need, the helmet, and try and conceal it somewhere if the ground allows concealment. And then what they've got to do is they've got to put distance between where they land. Hopefully they haven't injured themselves on landing. The landings on these type of parachutes, you can't really flare with them. You hit the ground hard. Hopefully they'll survive that. And then what they've got to do is they've got to put distance between where they've landed and where they need to evade to, because you've got all sorts of enemy forces that are going to be bearing down on this. You've got the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. You'll also likely have what's called the Basij, which are a volunteer militia force, and their numbers can range in hundreds of thousands to a million, depending on the war footing. And then you've got all this additional capability, like man-portable air defense systems. The Iranians will know that the Americans will be sending in air packages to try and recover the crews. So they're going to flood that area with surface-to-air type missile systems.
So let's talk about what we know now about this operation. We know that there was a colonel. He was in the backseat of the plane, managing the systems operation. We know that he was injured. President Trump said he was injured, but will make a recovery. So we know that it was in mountainous terrain. What then happens? He lands and he sets off an alert to a beacon to tell the US, the military, where he is, then they have to scramble to try and get to him before the Iranians.
Yeah, and so the double-edged sword on the beacon is that it's called a PRC 112. I used to carry them when I was flying over Baghdad. We had CSAR, Combat Search and Rescue, supporting us from Balad. And the great thing about the beacon is that as soon as you turn it on, it should be encrypted, which means that the Iranians won't be able to identify the beacons. That said, there is information out there to say that the Iranians do have Chinese technology that can do that. That's not verified or corroborated. But the beacon goes on, and then the Combat Search and Rescue package, which we'll go into in a second. Actually, you can see it on screen here. It's a HC-130 aircraft, which is in the front there. It's a derivative of what's called the Hercules. And then you've got two HH-60 Jolly Green 2 Black Hawk derivatives, if you like. You can see them refueling on that, actually. And the difference between a normal Black Hawk and the HH-60 Jolly Green 2 is it's got a refueling probe on the front, which allows air-to-air refueling. That's actually, I flew helicopters for 25 years. That's actually quite dangerous in itself before you've got anywhere near the threat area. It's also got TFR, terrain following radar. So there's all sorts of bits on that. But that package will be alerted by that beacon going off. And the reason why I say it's a double-edged sword is because if the beacon is in an area where there's no terrain, that beacon obviously is able to go further. The signal is able to go further. But what we're starting to now get information on is that the second airman, the weapons systems operator, the colonel, started to put distance between himself and the impact point and go for terrain. Now that's smart in itself, because the higher you go with that beacon, obviously the further that beacon signal will go, which means the probability of detection will be higher. However, there's also chatter on open source intelligence to say that he was in a ravine and that beacon couldn't be seen. Now that makes sense, because in the first 12 hours, the Combat Search and Rescue package got the pilot, but they couldn't find the weapons systems operators. And there's now information emerging on open source intelligence that the CIA got involved, and they got involved on, this is what we think of the Basij, which are the volunteer militia. So they're not IRGC, as you can see, but they are in significant numbers. So
they're on the hunt for him, and the Iranian authorities have offered a reward, haven't they, for anyone who finds him?
There was a significant reward offered by them, and they'll be flooding the area. But going back to the beacon piece and the CIA, so the CIA start putting out an information campaign which basically spreads the word in Iran that actually the second airman has actually been captured. And then the second piece is the CIA have technology to identify where that is, where the beacon can't.
OK, well, we know this was hugely daring. It did succeed, but apparently the chances of success are pretty slim. Military affairs analyst and retired Marine Corps Colonel Brendan Kearney gave his reaction and assessment to this news.
In this particular case, the United States was able to pull it off, and I'm thrilled for that. I guarantee you, for all the times that we've attempted to do this in the past, particularly in Vietnam, success rates are usually very, very low, but this is something we can celebrate.
Well, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, put out new pictures of what they say is a wreck.
To suggest that it might have been they were stuck in sand or gravel. And so what the Americans have then done is that they've sent another 3 C-130 aircraft, landed on in the same location, picked up the troops that were due to extract from those 2, which is remarkable in itself. And then when those 3 have got airborne, they've left the 2 originals that were stuck behind, and then they've got American jets to come in and strike those aircraft and destroy those aircraft so the Iranians can't get their hands on them. And it's likely those aircraft were HC-130J, so they probably would have had sensitive equipment and capability on it, which is why the reason the US wanted to destroy them. So that wreckage that you can see on the screen, if we can play it one more time, that wreckage is the result of the US striking their own assets, because those 2 assets couldn't get out of Iran and they didn't want the Iranians to put their hands on it.
Give us an idea.
You are always digesting the information of the threat, and you never really think about the consequences of being shot down. But obviously you prepare yourself. You prepare yourself before you deploy. So you'll do survival, evasion, resistance and escape, which is called SEER. And then you'll have an evasion plan of action before you get airborne, which will look at likely routes out, what will happen, what the communications channels are, and you'll be trained. You'll be trained in resistance to interrogation. But Samantha, training and then the real life event, the adrenaline rush, I mean, I've thankfully never been shot down, but the adrenaline rush that the weapons system operator will have experienced will have been absolutely off the charts. And that adrenaline will help in many ways, because if you're slightly injured, There are stories of, it was a friend of mine that ejected from a Jaguar aircraft way back. He survived on adrenaline after the ejection for about 30 seconds and then collapsed once the adrenaline had gone, and he'd broken his back basically. So the adrenaline can assist in the early bits, but as soon as it runs off, that's when the reality of the situation starts coming in. And then it's a mental game. So it's a mental game of you literally just have to center yourself and start thinking about the reality of where you are. So what are the procedures and protocols that you've been taught? Get the beacon on, hide all your gear, get to high ground, conceal yourself, and then what's going on with the threat. Establish communications, and then sort of you've got to take it bit by bit. It's remarkable because the longer time goes on, the more this colonel is going to be thinking, am I actually going to be rescued or not? So 48 hours, the mindset of that colonel and the psychology is going to be depreciating.